Welcome to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Today's topic is commissioning new music for double bass. So, Susan, can you tell me about your experiences of commissioning new music for double bass?
Oh, I can. Hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Susan. Very well, thank you.
Good. Um, I've had a whole mix of experiences. Um, with commissioning music, the first thing I learned the hard way is it's not a rude question to ask someone the fee before you commit to having them write something for you. Um, because I've had some little surprises where some people I didn't think to ask, and then the bill came in and it was huge, and I was shocked and a little embarrassed, and I forked over large sums of money, and it's just good to know what someone
Mm,
wants for it,
yes.
and they want money for their time and their effort, and that's of course fine. That's good, um, but you don't want to be stuck with a $2,000 bill for a 3-minute piece and not have planned for that. Um, One of the other things is now the more pieces I've commissioned, I like to have a little bit of input. Like I used to say, "Oh, I liked your piece such and such. Will you write me a piece?" And I did that twice with two different composers that warranted pieces I really didn't love. They weren't like the
Mm,
piece I had said I enjoyed. Um, so then I thought, oh, maybe it's my wording. So how about if I say, I liked such and such piece. Would you write me a piece in that style?
mm,
It got me closer to the results I wanted.
mm.
um, but I think there are probably, and I'm sure you've had many experiences with how to get a piece that you know you're going to enjoy. And how hands-on can you be, and how hands-off, and you've had it from both ends as a composer and as a performer. Tell me about some of your experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been commissioning since I was a student at the Royal College of Music in London.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just asked other composition students if they'd like to write a piece for us. I played in a bass quartet.
Nice.
And we got some way out and wacky pieces, I'll tell you. And some they're just unplayable, or everything is on the E string. All four basses are playing on the E string. So every commission is interesting because they're all different.
Yeah.
Some composers want a big fee. Some composers are happy just to write. Some composers are happy for input. Some composers don't want any input.
Yeah.
It's so everyone is different. But I always say, if you're not sure, write it and send it to me, and then I can explain what works and what doesn't and why,
Right.
um, which will hopefully give you an idea. A composer who's never written for bass before sent me a piece. She thought for a young bass player, a beginner bass player, but it was really quite difficult. And it's everything that a young bass player doesn't do, jumping around.
Oh yeah.
And young bass players move by step,
Right.
so it's really quite simple. So if you don't move by step, you're not into to beginner territory. It's it's
Right.
it's difficult. It's the thing I've always tried to do is try to find the composers who've written good pieces before, who have some
Yes.
understanding of what the bass is about, because I think you have more opportunity of getting something that works. I've also had many pieces that don't work,
Right.
many pieces that have never heard a bass before. We had a bass quartet written by a Czech composer, really very good Czech composer, and he wrote it, and it was a really very good piece, but maybe not for bass quartet. And we played
Mm-hmm.
it. We played it at a big concert in London, and he came off to the concert, and afterwards he said, "If I'd heard a bass quartet before I wrote it, I would have written something different."
And
Ah,
sometimes
right.
you wonder, why didn't they listen to something or ask you for pieces that they could listen to as reference?
Yeah, sometimes I will, if they're not bass players, I'll
Yeah.
send them examples of what's possible,
Right.
just to sort of open their eyes and ears. You and I have got a new piece by a composer, and she uses this orchestration book by Gordon Jacob.
Right.
And so it says the bass, it doesn't go beyond maybe G octave or something like that. It's a 2 octave range. So a
Yeah.
lot of her music is within that 2 octave range. But he's saying for orchestral, but I'm
Right.
commissioning her to write for solo, which is
Yes.
different. But she's really fantastic, and she'll allow me to change things, and make it more playable for bass, because
Yeah.
I, like you, I know how to do that.
Right, right.
Mm,
I think that makes all the difference too. Is, there was a composer in Boston that had written this absolutely stunningly glorious choral
mm,
piece, and there was an orchestral accompaniment, and I had played it, and I fell in love with the piece. And so I talked to him afterwards. I said, I adore this piece. Would you write something for double bass? And I thought, well, he'd written the orchestral bass part. He must have some knowledge. He gladly wrote me a piece.
mm.
And it was written for an instrument that tunes in fifths, and it was an Irish reel. It wasn't a lyrical, choral, beautiful thing.
Yes.
I was expecting like some chords for the bass because we can
Yeah.
play more than one note at a time. And I was expecting lyrical.
Mm,
And I got this Irish reel tuned in fifths. And I looked at it and there was a huge bill for the piece. And I thought, what am
goodness.
I going to do? I've got to pay this and never play it. And he wasn't like you can give me input type of person.
Mm.
So I paid the bill, and the piece is still sitting on my shelf, right to the left of where I'm sitting right now.
That's just reminded me. I commissioned one composer. He was a pianist composer, and he'd written this piece for solo bass with, I don't know, 50 double stops, 80 double stops,
Mm.
and 98% of them didn't work.
Ugh.
And it was one of those things. So, and I said, and he was so angry that I told him that he didn't. So he then recomposed it, and I think suddenly this 3 minute piece became a 45-second piece, of 18 notes or something like that. And so
Right.
I paid him, and I said I wasn't very happy, and I remember him saying, I've won competitions for my composition, and
Uh,
I felt like saying, well, you wouldn't have done for this one, mate. I'll tell you now.
no,
But
no.
it's you have to do some of the homework yourself as the
Yeah,
composer. You
yeah.
have to have some idea. You can't know everything because that's our job to know what works and what doesn't.
Right, right. Now, as a composer, I know I commissioned even books of
Mm,
pieces like
mm.
uh, when you did the collection of George. I call it
Yes.
lovingly George in Europe, which is
Yeah.
totally not the name of it, but I just get so excited that that's what I call it. And it's, I had asked you, can you write pieces that are, well, I don't want my students to know because they're kind of etudes, but um, they're technically challenging pieces of music, and it's nice because they're music. But now, how do you deal when some lunatic like me says to you, "Can you write a series of pieces that are in, what I call the danger zone, that area
Oh,
right before
they were really
composition?"
nice to write, and it's nice to have um, parameters. It was a really nice commission. I enjoyed that one. And once I'd worked out, it was George's grand tour.
Yes.
So I'd got 8 cities.
Yeah.
And so it just meant that each piece, I think I started in Prague actually with a
Mm-hmm.
Czech
That's number
Führer,
one.
Führer, something like that.
If
And
very
once I
furious.
started, that was really good. But I think they remained in bass clef, and yeah, you wanted them around fourth, fifth positions, around you said the danger zone.
Yep.
Um, and I tried to make sure they were interesting to learn, but also interesting to play.
I feel like
And interesting.
each one
Yeah,
captured the spirit
I
of the
taught
city that
Yeah,
you
I
set them
taught one
in.
the other night. I taught George's Russian Romance,
Oh, I love that.
which starts with double stops.
Yes, it does.
And they're not difficult, but they sound really impressive.
They ring so beautifully because you
Yeah,
know the bass.
because I know how to write for the bass. So I can make music for young players more interesting
Yeah.
because I know what rings. So whereas a far greater composer than me would write a better piece, but probably won't work as well.
No, I think
My
these
piece will.
pieces work so well. This collection of George's Grand Tour, there's one problem with it,
Mm.
is that it was so good that then I asked you to write a collection of pieces that went through the danger zone into thumb position, and then I had you write another one that was entirely in thumb position, and then one that was all harmonics. So it's sort of like it just kept opening the door to
It,
me, bugging you for
it
more
was nice
things.
though. Yeah, I really enjoyed scaling the heights
Yeah,
because you
scaling the
wanted that
heights
one,
is danger zone to thumb position.
yeah, in and out of thumb position.
Yeah.
And again, once I'd worked out that was, is it every major minor key? Was it 20
Yes.
pieces? I
Yes,
think,
it's 24, every major and minor.
yeah. And I tried to make sure that you had 2 pieces per page. So
Yep.
they're not too long, not too short, but hopefully interesting enough. And again, usually I found the title first.
Mm.
But when I was writing, it was really fascinating because it was typical of lots of things. When it's a major key, you write happy music, and when it's a minor key,
Right.
you write sad music.
Yeah.
And I found myself going down that path, so I decided to change it.
You
I,
did.
I wrote, was it B flat minor? I think
Yes.
one of the happiest pieces I think I've ever written.
Yes.
It was
Absolutely.
so funny. I really enjoyed writing that. It was a nice collection. It was interesting. And as I say, once I got the titles for each one, um, but I think that again, you've got scales and arpeggios
Right.
and possible different fingerings, maybe up and down the string, sometimes across the string.
Right.
So there's always a didactic element to the
Yeah.
music I write.
And I like for this, scaling the heights goes in and out of thumb position. And I'll have a student who every now and then will cross over and stay in thumb position. I'm like, no, no, no. That's the next book. That's aiming high. That you can keep entirely in thumb position. But scaling the heights, you can't. It's just not allowed by me.
I think they're not bad pieces. I think they're quite nice teaching pieces. I'm
I
quite pleased
find
with those.
this my
Mm,
students love them,
mm,
and so they're learning how to get around the fingerboard, how to get in and out of thumb position, which can be awkward physically,
mm,
and they're learning it with pieces that they're enjoying, so that then when they get to a Bottesini or a Kuzovitsky or
mm.
anything where they have to be able to do that, I consider it like you have to be fluent in making those
I tried to write
transitions.
them as etudes,
Mm-hmm.
but hidden within the
Yep.
music. So
Yeah.
they're learning lots of things
Yep.
without them realizing they're learning lots
Yeah.
of educational aspects of how to play the bass, how to move from position to position, in and out of thumb position.
Yeah, and I think
So
you've
that
done
was
it
interesting.
well because
Mm,
I'll say to a student every now and then, I'm like, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. This is a technical piece. It's like if you watch ice skating competitions, this is the short program, but it's disguised because it's a beautiful piece.
mm.
But I think the trouble is when you do a really good commission, people are going to come back and ask you for more. Maybe that's
That's
not a
nice.
bad thing.
What was the best commission you've ever made? Because I know you've commissioned lots of pieces.
You know what? I'm partial to your music.
Well, that's
And
kind.
so
I
I
didn't
have
ask you
this.
for that reason.
I know. But I have this problem because every piece that you ever write for me, I'm always like, oh, this is my favorite piece. And then there's another piece. I'm like, this is my favorite piece. Um, I think that Rodrigo Mata,
Mm,
we've commissioned a piece that we're gonna play this
yes.
coming April,
Mm,
a solo piece. I'm learning that one right now, and it's quite beautiful. It's inspired
mm,
by Kuzovitsky, um, and it's a waltz. And I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's right here, somewhere. It'll come to me in a minute. Um, but it's quite beautiful and it's a lot of fun to play. It's a prelude and waltz. And
mm.
the opening actually sounds like Sibelius.
Wow,
And in
fantastic.
Rodrigo's typical style, it has, harmonics and double stops where one note isn't a harmonic, which can be challenging, but really can be quite beautiful. Um, I've never commissioned anything. Well, we sort of have, but we're waiting on it still by Simone Garcia.
Mm.
Um, but I know that I'm sure I will like it. I know he's writing a piece for the two of us
Yeah.
when he's so busy though. So when he gets around to it, people like that, I feel like I don't need to give them too many parameters because like you're bass players. And
Mm.
unless I have like for you, I'll sometimes ask you to write things for my students because I have a specific need of things that I want to be able to teach. Um, I love for my students to be able to tackle a technical problem before they learn a big piece that has it all over the place.
Mm.
Um, which is why these books I commissioned from you are just marvelous because then they go to play, a standard piece
Mm.
and they've already been in and out of that position. For me, the first time I came in and out of that position was the Eccles Sonata.
Yes.
The
Yeah. And
da
me.
ya da 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 da, and I'm like, oh my god, how do I do this? And it sounds jerky and awful,
Mm.
um, and panicky. But
Mm.
if I teach your music first, your disguised etudes, disguised as
Mm.
beautiful music, then when they go to do a piece like that, they don't even have the experience I did when I learned the
Yeah.
echoes of
Mm.
sheer panic. They've
Mm.
already mastered how to do it. Um, so I'm I'm afraid that when I don't commission bass players to write music for me, I've in general had not ideal experiences.
It's
Um,
yeah, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because for
yeah,
many, the bass is just this unknown instrument, and all they know is the bass sitting in an orchestra,
yeah,
and most of
yeah,
the composers have no concept that we can do anything else.
right,
I've worked with many great composers. Tony Osborne, I worked with for about 25 years,
right.
and for the last 25 years of Tony's life, almost everything he wrote for bass was commissioned from me.
Mm,
He was an amazing chap. He really talented. I don't think he knew how talented he was, and it just music was. It was just there. When Avidio Badilla died, and suddenly age 39, I heard about it on the Saturday, and we had Bass Fest the following week. So I just phoned Tony, and I said, I need
mm-hmm.
a piece, Tony. It's for three basses for me, Meta, and Teppo, Meta Hanskoff, Teppo
Yes.
Ataho to play. We'd all been friends of a video, and I said the title is because Tony was terrible with titles. I told him Threnody for a video, and by the next afternoon, he'd written it and faxed it through. The fax in those
Mm,
days, and it's one of
wow.
his best pieces. It's
That's a beautiful
unbelievable.
piece.
Yeah, and he wrote so many great pieces, and he was fantastic at writing for younger players as well,
Yeah,
because he was a bass player and teacher.
right.
And some of the quartets he's written, Pink Elephant and
Yep,
Habanera and Green Bass Blues, they're such great pieces that using a limited number of notes, but they contain such great music, and people love young bass players love playing them.
right. Oh
Really.
yeah. In fact, I heard the Pink Elephant. I taught that.
Mm,
It was more massed basses because
mm,
there were 12 of them doing it.
yeah.
And I was like, "Who's this Tony Osborne guy? This piece is great. It's fun." And that was probably almost 20 years ago.
Mm,
And then when I met you, I was like, "Oh, that's who Tony Osborne is." Okay, and you would talk about him and tell me what good friends the two of you
mm,
were and all. And because of that, I've learned more of his music. And I
mm.
taught the Threnody last year to my trio at Berkeley, the Sunshine Trio. They've all graduated since. And that was just a beautiful piece and very moving.
Mm.
He really
I,
captured the right
we were in the Czech
feeling.
Republic a few years ago at a bass convention, and on the Sunday morning, we just a couple of teachers were sitting together talking, and suddenly I heard in the background this music start,
Mm-hmm.
and it was some of the students just I think they were rehearsing it. They're playing it later that day, and just the hairs on the back of my neck just stood up. It's wow, and just suddenly the emotions come back. You remember, and it's just such a powerful piece, and it's one of those pieces where you have to try and play your best.
Mm,
It's a really great piece because there's something about it. It's Tony wrote lots of jazzy, fun pieces. He had that great skill, but this was
yes.
the other side of Tony.
Yeah.
This was a side he didn't often write,
Okay. Yeah. It
but
was
it
more
was there.
introspective.
Yes, I wished he'd written more of it
Yeah.
because he had so many skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
It was, and it's amazing that, well, he was probably really moved in
Mm.
that moment to write such a deep piece, and
Well,
it was the right
Tony was a
time
good
for it.
friend, and he
Yeah.
knew how upset we were,
Right.
and he wanted to write his best piece for us, which was
Yeah.
so kind of him. And we premiered it a week later. We did it was Bass Fest, and I think Tony was there and must have recorded it. And then months later, I went round to visit him, and he played the recording, and I was
Oh.
so surprised how fantastic it sounded. It
Mm.
really was amazing.
Yeah.
And in fact,
It's a
we did it with
beautiful piece.
four of us
Oh, no
instead of
kidding.
three. Yeah, it worked. So Peter Leerdam joined Teppo on bass three,
Oh,
which
cool.
was nice. But
Yeah.
it's amazing. And then so yeah, to Teppo how to Aho. And Teppo and I both studied in Prague with František Pošta. He
Right.
was there in the 1960s. I was there in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And Teppo and I were friends for I don't know, 25 years. And again, he wrote so many pieces for me and my students. He was
Yes.
absolutely amazing. And he just wrote always interesting music,
Yeah.
always. And he wrote a bass quartet called Why, and that was when Ovidiu died. And why did he die? And
Right.
it's the most powerful piece, and
Yeah.
it's absolutely stunning piece. I did it with with my students at Wells. I had 1 year, I had three fantastic students, and
Mm,
we did a concert, the history of the bass quartet, and we
nice.
did music by Alt and I think Lauber. So they're from the 1930s and 40s,
Yep.
and then up to date, and we did Simon Garcia and we did Teppo, and
Nice.
the pupils absolutely they just lapped it up,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
quite atonal, quite modern,
Hmm.
but really quite powerful, and it's nice. It's I'm so pleased to be part of so many of these great pieces.
Yeah.
It's really it's quite a privilege
Yeah.
to have known Teppo, been such a great friend of Teppo's for so long, and to commission so many pieces from him.
Yeah. Well, you've commissioned so many pieces from so many people. You've kind of been at the heart of commissioning for double bass in our
You know,
time.
I was inspired. One of my second teacher, Lawrence Gray, he
Mm,
was telling me about the Paris Conservatoire, and they used because I studied the Edward Nanny concerto with him,
okay.
and he was telling me that they used to commission a piece every year for the bass players who were going to graduate for their final recital. And so, over 60 years, there were 60 pieces or however many pieces there are.
Hmm.
And I thought, what a great idea. And then I read about Bert Turetsky, and I saw that Bert had commissioned 300 pieces. And then Rodney Slatford was commissioning new pieces.
Right.
Um, and it just inspired me to do the same.
Yeah.
And I started when I was at music college. And I'd met Sarah then. Sarah, my wife, is a singer. And Betty Rowe, an English composer, had written these jazz songs for
Hmm.
soprano and bass. And I found Betty's address. She lived in London. I just wrote to her, and
Very
this is what I
interesting.
said: would you write some more songs for us? And I
Yeah.
had no idea of how to pay for them or
Right.
what you did. And I went one Sunday afternoon for afternoon tea with her and her husband. And John was sort of the business side of things. And he said, yeah, Betty, she'll write 5 songs and they're £50 each. Oh, fantastic.
Wow.
So that was okay. At least I knew £250 was possible.
Yeah.
And then in the early days, I used to be a music copyist before
Hmm.
computers. I had a very good hand. And then I would work for John and I would typeset lots of Betty's music.
Ah,
And so
nice.
I would offset what he would pay me against what I owed Betty.
Perfect.
And
That
so
worked out
it was
great.
yeah, it's a very good relationship. And I
Wow.
just started commissioning, and I think it must be up to about 750 pieces now, maybe more.
And now you're doing the 40 at 40, right? For recycled
Yes,
music.
that's Recycle Music is 38 years old this year, my publishing company,
Hmm.
and so 2026 is our 40th anniversary. And I thought I should commission 40 pieces,
Yeah.
and I worked out because I started it about June last year,
Hmm.
and by June 2026, give or take, that's 40 months.
Right.
So I'm commissioning sort of one a month, and I've commissioned 12 so far, and I think 5 have been completed. And the
Excellent.
idea really is aimed at younger players
That's great.
because I want now to commission more music for young as I've written more pieces for
Right.
younger players, and I just want to commission more because it's the beginners who need more help.
Right. And there's more of them too.
It's not how it used to be. It's completely
Right.
changed.
There's
Yeah.
so many more young bass players, and I think that the books, the collections that I used as a kid,
Mm,
life was different. I mean, I feel like students were expecting practicing to be serious and not
mm,
necessarily always fun, although I enjoyed playing the bass. Sometimes the etudes I was learning, I knew they were kind of like taking my medicine. Didn't
mm,
love it, but I knew it was going to bring me to the
mm,
desired end. Um, but I think now it's okay to be entertained and enjoy practicing, and I think for kids, if they don't enjoy it, they're not going to keep doing it.
mm,
So I think it's nice to have, I say this to my younger students, it's nice to have a selection of options.
mm,
Once in a while, a student will be like, you know what, I'm not enjoying this piece for whatever reason. More often than not, they were just having a bad week. They played it on a bad day and then they just didn't like it. And so I say to them, if you're not enjoying it, let me know. I'll swap it out for something different. I've
mm,
got, off the top of my head, I've got a dozen other options that I could
mm,
choose from for you. Um, and usually just them knowing that. They're
Mm.
fine with what I've selected for them. But once in a while, I had one student that would do it every week, and finally was like, okay, this week you have to learn the piece I've assigned you the first time, just because I wanted to see if he could do it. But he was one of those kids that always wanted to know all his options before he chose what to practice. But he also would learn all of them. He'd be like, I didn't like this one, but I learned it anyway. I really liked this one. I also learned it. I was like, well, okay, that's good. But yeah, I think it's good for younger players to have options and not as much as I love the Samandel new method.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's still a great book. It's the one I
it
use.
is,
Yeah.
but I think it's nice to supplement it with, I don't know, more enjoyable pieces too, which I didn't have. It was like that and maybe a district audition piece that I had to learn. And
Mm.
that would be it. And that was always sort of, a Vivaldi sonata, an Eccles sonata, and a movement or two from those, which were good. But you're writing beautiful and fun things. And a lot of the music, The Adventures of George, your first book
Mm.
of those series of, technique kind of focused pieces, the kids are learning Colegno and Ponticello and harmonics and left-hand pizzicato. And I have to tell you, people love it.
I
My
know,
students just
but
love
it's
it.
quite easy because when you're writing for beginners, you have a limited number of notes and rhythms and keys and things like. So you can
Right.
introduce other things like that, which
Yeah.
just add another element. It was interesting. Some of my students were playing Romeo and Juliet by Prokofiev,
Oh, yep.
and they came into my room. They're screaming with laughter. I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "We just had a rehearsal, and there was one bit where the cellos and basses have to play sul ponticello." And he said, and we just knew exactly what to do. And the cellist hadn't got a clue. And they were so pleased. I said, yes,
It's true
finally.
though. 20 years ago,
Mm.
bass players never knew those instructions until you encountered them in an orchestral piece, right? And I love, how did you come up with the idea of just putting those in beginner pieces?
I think just to make it more interesting,
Mm.
and just to add another skill, because with the George piece, the Adventures of George, I wrote him a piece every week. This was during lockdown, so I would just whatever lesson we've done, I would just at the end of the lesson I would say, George, can you do this? And
Mm.
it could be Collegno or it could be a glissando or something. And yes,
Right.
he could. Okay, so I'd write him a piece which next week included glissando or double stops or
That's great.
Collegno. Simple as that. And it's like harmonics. I like introducing them early, so they're not an issue.
Yeah. I
Um,
love that
mm,
because when I was learning, that was like, oh, you can only do that if you're a grown-up bass player. And then when you finally got there, you felt, maybe a level of accomplishment, but you also hadn't been doing it forever. So
mm,
then all of a sudden it sounded bad in the beginning, right?
yeah.
And you're like a better player, and all of a sudden you can barely make the harmonics speak
Mm.
the way you need to. I love that you incorporate those things, and I feel like it gives a young player more colors on their palette right away that they can tap into, and they enjoy it too.
And you don't have much Collegno in Beethoven, that I admit. Um,
That's okay.
but you do in the first movement from the planets.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
and you have to be able to learn, and youth orchestras do play the Planet Suite
Oh,
now.
they do. They
So
do. And
mm,
oh, and how many kids just have their bows bouncing around like ricocheting because they've never learned to control it, you
exactly.
know? It's great.
You know, I once recorded that.
Mhm.
It was, I think it was a wind orchestra or something. I was brought in to do it. So it's one bass, and we
Yeah.
did Mars, and it's always the strings doing the Collegno. Da, 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 dum,
Mhm.
bum, bum, bum. It was just me and the timpani.
Oh, wow.
So, and I had a microphone right in front of me,
Yeah.
so you could hear every bounce of the boat. And I was so relieved when we recorded it. And then on the next day of recording, you open the pad and everything's in order.
Yep.
And the first one was Mars again. I thought, oh no, I thought I got away with it. But to try and get da 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 dum bum 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 da 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 dum bum bum bum, it's quite difficult.
It
Is it
is.
about 40 bars or 40 measures,
Oh,
or
yeah, it's a
it's a
lot.
long time?
It is. It is.
Coming back to commissioning,
Yes.
um, my advice always is ask the composer if they want to write.
Yeah.
Some of them will be writing an opera, so they won't have time for anything,
Right.
and some of them will be interested. Some of them will want too much money. Some will be happy to just write it for you if you can
Yeah.
offer a performance.
Yeah.
But my advice is just ask if
Yeah,
you want.
I think it's always good to ask. It's like
Mm,
ice cream. Try it. Try a new flavor. See if you like it. You never know.
exactly, exactly. So when
Everything
when
comes
I was
back to ice
when I
cream.
was first started playing the bass, we used a lot of transcriptions, and I have no problem with transcriptions because I think some of them are fantastic, and it's why the bass has progressed so far. But I always felt as though we should have our own repertoire as well as transcriptions.
Yes. Yes, and
That
you've
was
done a lot of that.
mm,
And I
I've
think
really
that's
enjoyed it.
great.
It's been one of the greatest pleasures of my life, commission and publishing. Really,
It's great. I'm grateful to you because you've commissioned and written so many pieces. It's because of you that we have probably 1,000 extra pieces that wouldn't have existed. You know,
well,
it's
it's
really
nice. I've enjoyed
exciting.
it, and also with recital music, bringing music into print,
Yeah,
which had remained in manuscript.
right.
It's nice to the music by Rudolf Tulacek or Wojtek Kukinka. These
Right.
pieces had never been published,
Yep.
and I've really enjoyed creating new editions.
Yep.
And it just means they're there for future generations if they want them. If they
Right.
don't, I've still enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. It's great. Well, I think wrapping it up, commission, go for it. Everybody should ask
Definitely.
away, and I think
Yeah.
it's great and it's fun because who knows what you're going to get. Could be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to season 2 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. Like and subscribe. And I want to thank you to our sponsor, GraceGalleryDesign.net, for all of your gift giving needs. And any other sponsors that are interested, let us know. We look forward to seeing you and talking to you soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.